So, do you really want to know if God exists? Are you willing to invest less time than it does to wash a load of laundry to understand the answer to one of the world's great questions? Or do you lack the necessary intellectual courage to continue because you prefer to live in a convenient ignorance that allows you to disregard the fact that there is more to this universe than what you see? Please understand, if you click away now without listening to my argument, you cannot logically claim that you know that there is no God. Ironically, all that you will be able to reasonably state is that you believe there is no God. Welcome to First Person Philosophy. Salve. My name is Thomas Aquinas, and I'm a 13th century Catholic Dominican priest. In 3 related videos, I will prove the existence of the Creator with an argument that will withstand the criticism of the most ardent atheist. The argument I present does not assume faith or belief in Holy Scripture, that is the Bible, for it rests upon reason alone. These 3 videos are based upon what I wrote in Question 2, Articles 1 through 3 of the first part of my Summa Theologica. Links to the relevant text are below. I invite you to read these 3 brief articles in addition to watching these videos. Following the Summa, in this video, I will first explain why it is advantageous for believers to prove God's existence and not simply rest on blind faith. In the second video, I will illustrate how philosophical arguments work, and I will show how they can successfully prove the existence of things. And finally, in the third video, I will prove God exists by summarizing 5 ways to prove God's existence, which are known in history as the 5 ways. I urge you not to skip these first 2 videos if you want to fully understand how the 5 ways work. Information given in these 2 preliminary videos is crucial to understand before I present the arguments for God's existence. Now, it will surprise no one that I believe God exists. I am, after all, a Catholic priest and theologian and a canonized saint. But it may surprise you to learn that I believe in God because reason demands it, and not simply because I want there to be a God. The logic of the argument makes clear that nothing is more certain in the universe than God's existence, for God's existence is apparent to anyone who investigates the matter. Reason, not faith alone, is why I know God exists.
Whoa! With all due respect, Thomas, I think you need to slow down. I know you believe in God. That's fine. I have no problem with your belief. But the modern world has explored the origins of the universe, and there's no evidence for God. And this is why religions are called faiths, because religious people believe in something in the absence of evidence.
Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson, welcome to the discussion. You are partially correct, my friend. Some religious people do believe in God without evidence. They just believe. And like you, I have no problem with their belief. It's all good. However, other believers like me have reasons to believe in God. We are not irrational or anti-science. We do not believe in God against the evidence, but because of it.
But where is the evidence? As a scientist, I cannot accept as true what has not been verified by repeated observation and a strong consistency of results. For over 400 years, science has been giving us objective truths. Philosophy does not give us facts. It is not a science.
With all due respect, Dr. Tyson, you are wrong. Philosophy is a science in the original meaning of the word, since it is an organized way of learning. However, more to your point, I fully agree with you that the scientific method is a great success and that it has helped us understand much about the world and why nature works as it does. Modern science is to be praised and used. However, people are wrong if they foolishly think that modern science is the only way to discover truth. Philosophy, that is, logical reasoning, has also successfully proven many truths about things that cannot be studied by science. For example, my proofs for God's existence are philosophical proofs and not scientific truths, for they are not dependent upon measurement or experiment. Instead, each of my 5 ways is a demonstration or a valid argument with true premises. The conclusion of each of the 5 ways necessarily follows from a universally accepted metaphysical principle and a particular sense data apparent to and accepted by all. The explanation of why these philosophical arguments are so successful will be given in the second video of this series.
Thomas, I understand you value the work of your discipline, but I am a scientist, which means I must think and act in the physical world and not in a world filled with speculation and metaphysical jargon. I need verifiable physical evidence, not empty words.
I understand you are a strong proponent of naturalism, or the belief that only physical explanations count as evidence. Such reductionism is the hallmark of the modern age. But, Dr. Tyson, you should be aware that if you were somehow able to prove my confidence in philosophy is unreasonable, you would not be able to do so with science. Rather, ironically, you would need to use philosophical reasoning and not science to prove science alone discovers the truth. I trust you understand the contradiction in your strict adherence to naturalism.
Fine, I accept your general point. Not all reasoning is scientific, but I am convinced that you will not be able to prove God's existence to my satisfaction.
Perhaps I won't, although I think I will. All I can do at this moment is to ask you to watch these videos and judge for yourself. Have I successfully proven that a supernatural being, the Creator, must exist if the physical world is to exist?
Fine! I have no problem if, as we probe the origins of things, we bump into the bearded man. If that shows up, we're good to go. Not a problem. But I think there's just no evidence of it.
Dr. Tyson, we understand each other. I will proceed. However, dear viewer, before I prove God's existence, I must get to the main point of this first video, which is to explain why it is advantageous to prove God's existence even to the believer, and not to rest upon blind faith alone. In short, I will show that God's existence is not so obvious that it doesn't require some proof. So, in Part 1, Question 2, Article 1 of my Summa Theologica, I ask, is the existence of God self-evident? This is an interesting question and an important place for our discussion to begin. If the answer is yes, it would be a waste of time to prove God's existence. If God's existence was self-evident, any efforts to prove that fact would be needlessly redundant, since every reasonable person would already believe. However, if the answer is no, belief in God might appear to be irrational. If no argument could ever prove God's existence, then belief in God would be believing without evidence. So, which is it? Is God's existence self-evident? Yes, the existence of God is self-evident, but not to all people. Let me explain. Every sentence has a subject and a predicate. The subject is the person or thing in a sentence that is acting or being discussed. The predicate is the part of the sentence that contains the verb and is about the sentence. Or, simply put, the predicate is what the subject says or does. The sentence, Beatrice hits the ball, is a proposition, or a sentence that is either true or false. It makes what logicians call a truth claim. In this proposition, Beatrice is the subject, and the predicate is what she does. A self-evident proposition is a sentence in which the predicate repeats the essence of the subject. This means that every self-evident proposition is, in a way, restating in the predicate what the subject essentially is. For example, the ball is round is self-evident because all balls, without qualification, are by definition round. Americans today do call footballs balls, but an American football is a qualified example of a ball. But most of the rest of the world recognizes that this is a real football. When someone refers to a regular ball without qualification, the idea of roundness is already contained within the concept of being a ball, since the essence of a ball is to be round. So the ball is round is self-evident because what the predicate contributes to the sentence is actually already included in the idea of the subject. The proposition the apple is red is not self-evident because being red is not part of the essence of being an apple. Some apples are red, but others are green or yellow. In this case, the predicate does not contain the essence of the subject. The proposition, man is an animal, is self-evident, however, because every person, by definition, has the essential traits of an animal. That is, every living person takes in nourishment, senses, moves, and reproduces, just like every other animal. Humans are more than simple animals. We have rationality, but we are animals. And to say man is an animal is not to say anything additional about humans. The proposition is self-evident. Why am I emphasizing what makes a proposition self-evident? To make clear that there are two types of self-evident propositions. The first type of self-evident proposition is self-evident in itself and to us, meaning to anyone who understands the words being used. For example, the proposition, "the whole is more than its parts," is self-evident to everyone who understands what whole and part mean. Hold the anchovies. The relationship between the two terms is obvious to just about everyone, and one need not or cannot do anything more to explain why this proposition is self-evident than to point out what whole and part mean. The whole is made of the parts, and thus is greater than the parts. Understand? Yes, I'm sure you do, as does almost everyone. The second type of self-evident proposition is self-evident in itself, but not to us, meaning not to everyone who hears the proposition. The predicate is repeating the essence of the subject, like all self-evident propositions do, but this fact is not known to everyone, but only to the learned. Let me explain. Consider the claim an incorporeal object does not take up space. This proposition is self-evident because not taking up space is a necessary property of being incorporeal, but not everyone understands this fact. Why is that? Well, many people do not know that incorporeal means without body, and some people do not realize that anything that does not take up space is without body. But once you do understand these points, once you grasp the definition of the things being discussed, you will realize that an incorporeal object does not take up space is a self-evident statement. The proposition was always self-evident, even before you knew the definition of the terms. So what changed? You did. You studied the issue, and now you understand and accept the truth, although you might have once erroneously thought that the proposition was not necessarily true. You should now recognize that both types of self-evident propositions were always self-evident in themselves. The key point to understand is that not every self-evident proposition is easily recognized by those who have not carefully thought about the proposition. Sometimes study is necessary to understand even what is self-evident. Now, how about this one? God exists. Is that proposition self-evident? This is a very interesting question. What do you think? Does the essence of God necessarily include the idea of existence? Or, to say it another way, is to exist part of God's essence? Well, yes, God and existence are one and the same. God is existence, or as Yahweh said it, I am who am. Are you, dear viewer, not sure God's existence is self-evident? Wonderful! Your doubt just proves the point of my first article, that sometimes it is necessary to study even what is self-evident, like God's existence, before it can be accepted. So, When atheists and agnostics deny God's existence is self-evident, my 5 ways will point out what they don't yet understand and help them recognize the essence of God, that is, to exist. It is likewise advantageous for believers, those who already have faith in God, to understand God's nature as well. Although some do believe without any reasons to believe can be given and should be given, since some people need reasons to accept what is true in itself. Such understanding often strengthens faith.
But wait! It appears that an awareness of God is naturally implanted in all of us, for all people have an intuitive sense that a higher power exists in the universe. Thus, God's existence is self-evident to all people, not just the learned. Contemporary anthropology confirms that every culture throughout history was aware of the divine, even if many cultures gave different names and powers to this higher power.
Respectfully, I disagree. Although it is true that all cultures have recognized that some kind of divine being exists, many of those cultures only know of God in a general and confused way. For example, although you may know that someone is walking toward you, you do not necessarily know that your friend Peter is walking toward you. Such vague knowledge of another is not real knowledge. Additional study is needed in order to make God's existence self-evident to all.
Thomas, you are seriously mistaken. No additional study of the learned is needed to know God exists. As you said earlier, propositions are understood to be self-evident as soon as the terms used are understood. So, once anyone understands what God means, that person also understands that God must exist. Why do I know this? Because I know that all people, even atheists, understand that God is defined as that which nothing greater can be conceived. And since that which exists in reality is always greater than that which exists in the mind alone, the greatest conceivable being, God, must actually exist in reality. No additional study or arguments attempting to prove God's existence, like your needless and unsupported 5 ways, are necessary. All one must do to grasp God's existence is to understand how everyone defines God as that which none greater can be conceived, and God's existence immediately follows.
You again. Sant'Anselmo, il mio amico Fiorfiato. I absolutely agree with you. God exists, but I strongly reject your infamous ontological argument. The key to understanding your error is to recognize that not everyone who can properly define God actually believes that the greatest conceivable being does not exist only mentally or in their mind alone. In short, thinking about something as existing, whether a perfect island or a perfect being, does not make it exist.
No, disvalli, mio grasso amico. Your 5 ways, ridicolo. They fail to prove the existence of anything. Give them up, Thomas, and believe in the perfection of God.
Mio Dio, com può un uomo così intelligente frantendere cios che e così semplice. I do believe God is perfect, but your argument doesn't focus on God's nature, but only as we define God's nature. Our mental conceptions do not have the ontological power to prove God exists.
You miss my point. How many times do I need to explain this to you? Amato, Dio, dammi pazienza. Once you understand that God is defined as that which nothing greater can be conceived, then it follows that...
Stop it with defining how we conceive of God. That's a mistake. Even Kant knows that we can't know.
We will meet again.
But not on a perfect island, since even though I can conceive of a perfect island, my understanding of that island does not make it exist.
Incredibile! I am not arguing for the existence of perfect islands. A perfect being is different than a perfect island, and far better than your 5 silly ways.
Gentlemen, Knock it off.
This is the end of the first video. Having proven that the existence of God is not self-evident to all people, but only the learned, I will illustrate in the next video that God's existence is not so obscure that it cannot be proven. Then, finally, in the third and final video, I will show you 5 ways to prove God's existence. Goodbye for now.